On today's show, we talk about Darius Garland, what a successful season looks like for him, and why I don't think he has to be an all-star again for this year to be a good one for the point guard for the Cavs. That's straight ahead right here on Locked On Cavs.
You are Locked On Cavs, your daily Cleveland Cavaliers podcast.
Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's up, everybody? I'm Danny Cunningham. You might know me from my time covering the Cleveland Cavaliers, places like 92.3 The Fan, Cleveland Magazine, and a number of other stops along the way. Thank you again for making Locked On Cavs your first listen every day. You can find us anywhere you get your podcasts, Apple, Spotify, anywhere else. Drop us a 5-star rating. Leave a nice review. Make sure you are subscribed because I've got a really big interview coming tomorrow right here on this feed. It is with someone who plays for the Cavs. That's all I'm going to say, but you're not going to want to miss that. Check us out on YouTube as well. Just search Locked On Cavs. Hit that thumbs up button if you're watching. Make sure you are subscribed and hit that notification bell as well. A proud part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's show is brought to you by Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off your first purchase. The subject of today's show is Darius Garland. We're doing a little bit of a player preview, and I brought in the guy, Martin Rickman, who knows Darius Garland pretty well. Wrote a really great feature on Darius Garland for Dime back in 2022. We're going to talk about that experience. But I want to start, Martin, with the most pressing question, the question that I think is the hardest to answer, the question that really doesn't have a correct or incorrect answer. But to you, what does a successful season for Darius Garland look like this year?
I think a successful season for Darius Garland is the Cleveland Cavaliers winning 2 rounds in the NBA playoffs. Whatever else happens, I think that's a successful season. Whether he's on the Cavs or not at that point in time, that's the goal for the Cavs, and that should be the only thing that matters for them. I don't think player performances necessarily statistically have anything to do with the trajectory of where this franchise is headed under Kenny Atkinson. I think some players will take a step forward. I think some players will take a step back. But in general, the playoffs are the goal now. It's not about individual success. It's not about whether or not guys are making all-star teams or not making all-star teams. They have to win playoff series for this to work and for this to be, in the eyes of the franchise and in the fan base, a successfully run overall rebuild and overall franchise build. I mean, so it's kind of a cop-out answer. We can get into the individuals soon, but I just think we're so hung up on what Evan Mobley is going to do, what Donovan's going to do, whether or not Jared Allen is going to be traded at the trade deadline, whether or not Darius is going to take a step forward or take a step back, or if he's going to be traded to the San Antonio Spurs at some point in time, whether or not Max Strus is a starter or Isaac Okoro should be here. None of that matters. Right now, it's about getting to the conference finals and looking for aspirations beyond that.
So I think that is down the right track. That's where I wanted to go, because I think you're right about the regular season for this team. It matters to an extent, but this team is always going to be judged on what happens in April and May. And if they play basketball past April and May, it was a complete and 100% success and does not need to be discussed. If they're playing basketball in June, everyone can agree there. It is just an overwhelming success of the season. But I think for this to be a successful year for Darius Garland, I'm with you with the Cavs have to win 2 rounds of the playoffs. But I think Darius Garland needs to be part of the reason why they win 2 rounds in the playoffs. Like, is there a world where things break the right way and the Cavs win 2 rounds of the playoffs because Donovan Mitchell is a superstar and Evan Mobley takes a step forward and Darius Garland's just okay? Yeah, I think there is a world where that could happen. But for me to feel really good about Darius Garland again, and I do think he's going to have a bounce back year, and I want to talk about just kind of what that looks like too. But for me to feel really good about him at this point next year, whether he's on the Cavs or not, I think I need to see him be an all-star caliber player in the playoffs, because I don't think he's been there yet.
Yeah, I think that's a totally fair assessment. And if we look at like the actual answer to your question, I believe it's 20 points, 40% from 3, getting the assist to turnover ratio under control, and being more consistent in the playoffs. If you achieve all 4 of those things, I think we're going to be having a totally different conversation about Darius Garland than we did heading into the offseason this year. If you look at what he did 2 seasons ago, and the Knicks series notwithstanding, that was a disaster for everyone involved. Their lights were too bright for everyone. It's not just Jarrett, you know.
Hey, I've heard that before.
But in that context, I mean, if you just got that exact carbon copy of that season, everyone would be screaming about how excited they were about the Cavs moving forward. Especially if you look at a couple of the shots that he did hit in the playoffs, where the monkey kind of got off his back there in the Magic series at the end. Like, I do think there is a possibility that just by putting the weight back on that he lost after his jaw was broken and just getting his mind right, having a full off season and staying healthy, you get back to that. The worry, of course, is that the injuries start to pile up with a guy like that. And when those injuries keep happening and you're consistently on the shelf, you can't get in a rhythm. And Darius's biggest availability, or his biggest ability, would be availability. I mean, it just truly has been a problem that's really plagued him since Vanderbilt. I mean, it's been an issue. But when he's on the floor and he can play consistently, he's comfortable. And that's the thing with DG that is really, really important, is that when he's in the flow of the offense, when he's comfortable, when he's feeling good, things naturally happen with the basketball that you like to see. It's when he's pressing, when he feels like there is pressure on him to perform, you tend to see him make decisions that aren't so great with the ball, or you tend to see him try to force the issue almost to speed up getting back in rhythm. But that's just not something that you can do in the flow of a game, especially when you're playing with a guy like Donovan who needs the ball in his hands as well. And that's when you run into that friction that I think a lot of people end up talking about when they see the poor performances. They don't tend to look at when the flow is going well, that things just naturally happen with the basketball that are good between the two of those guys. They focus on the negative performances, which is, I mean, they are glaring. So.
Right, and I get it, but I do think, like, I am still of the belief, Martin, that Darius Garland and Donovan Mitchell can coexist, and they can coexist on a team that can win and win big. And I feel like you don't have to look any farther than the first regular season that they played together. This past season for me, like, I am willing, especially if Darius Garland gets off to a good start, where last year he did not get off to a good start, and there were some things going on with him. I think he had some nagging injuries that weren't necessarily talked about all that much at the start of last year, before the jaw injury that knocked him out for 6 weeks and cost him like 15 or 20 pounds off of his body. But if he gets off to a better start than he did last year, I'm willing to erase last season from my memory. Because if you look at the first year Darius and Donovan played together, they were both awesome. I thought that they both had the best year of their career. Now, Darius made the All-Star team the year before that and was really good. I thought he was better that next year. He didn't make the All-Star team because it's really, really difficult to make the All-Star team with two players that play essentially the same position on the same team. That just doesn't happen. So Darius Garland's path to being an All-Star while in the Cavs is pretty severely roadblocked by Donovan Mitchell, because it does not really happen. So I don't think he needs that accolade for it to be a success. But if you just gave me a carbon copy of what he did in the 2022-2023 regular season and brought that to this season, I think that's a huge win.
Absolutely. And if you're saying that along with the fact that your career growth from Evan Mobley is positive, the role players are producing at a high level, and you're still getting the performance out of Jared Allen that you wanted to get, that, I mean, honestly, last season, if you get that or better, you're in really, really good shape there. I think you're going to look up and you're going to see this team gel in a way that we haven't yet seen. I mean, we've seen runs, right? Like you in the January stretch, that was about as well as any basketball team can play, you know, obviously the competition notwithstanding, but like even prior to that, the year before, there were sustainable runs within games where you see the top end gear of what this team is capable of. I think what you never saw were sustained effort levels in that regard on the offensive side of the ball, whether or not that was JB's problem, whether that was the issue that was always inherently going to be in place with JB. We don't need to worry about that now, but that is going to be Kenny's number one, you know, that's going to be whether or not he's successful. Can the offense be sustainable at a level that is consistent and high functioning with the caliber of players that are on this team? I think across the board, the talent level was so much higher last year than it was 2 seasons ago, but the offense looked worse pretty much from game one. So if all you do is take 2 seasons ago Cavaliers with the personnel that are in place and that offense actually executes, you're going to see a team that's going to probably make fans very, very happy. And I think Darius is going to be a big catalyst for that.
I think so too, and I think Kenny Atkinson's going to be a big catalyst for that. What we're going to do next, coming up on today's edition of Locked on Cavs, if Kenny Atkinson has to pick only one thing to change about Darius Garland, what would we want it to be? That's straight ahead right here on Locked on Cavs. Today's episode of Locked on Cavs is brought to you by FanDuel, and I've told you about FanDuel a ton. Why have I told you about FanDuel a ton? Because FanDuel is, of course, America's #1 sportsbook, and there's so many great things to tell you about FanDuel, about how, they've got the Cleveland Browns favored by 6.5 points on Sunday as they host the New York Football Giants. I think that's a really good number. I don't know. I'm not a big believer in the Browns offensively right now. I don't think Deshaun Watson's the answer, but I am a big believer in the Browns defense, particularly the defensive line. And even if I'm not a believer in Deshaun Watson, I think Daniel Jones, the New York Giants quarterback, is even worse. So what would I do? What would my play be? My play would be the Browns -6.5. I just don't think that the Giants are going to be able to score. So what you should do, whether you think that's a good bet or a bad bet, you should put $5 down on FanDuel, because right now, through September 22nd, all FanDuel customers can bet $5 and get a 3-week free trial of NFL Sunday Ticket from YouTube and YouTube TV. I meant what I said. Bet $5 on FanDuel and you get a 3-week free trial of NFL Sunday Ticket from YouTube and YouTube TV. Then with the YouTube TV base plan, you will be able to watch every regular season Sunday afternoon out-of-market game. All you need is a Google account and a current form of payment, and you can cancel anytime. I've got Sunday Ticket. I don't know how I handled Sundays before I had Sunday Ticket. It is one of the best things ever, and getting it for free for 3 weeks, that is absolutely a win. All you got to do is bet $5 on FanDuel, and you're probably going to win the bet anyways if you're smart, right? So FanDuel, the place to go. They're giving you NFL Sunday Ticket for free for 3 weeks. It is a great deal. You cannot beat it. That is one of the reasons why FanDuel is America's #1 sportsbook. So just visit FanDuel.com and download America's #1 sportsbook today to get started. Thank you again for making Locked on Cavs your first listen every day. Martin Rickman with me on today's shows. We talk about what a successful season for Darius Garland was. And before the break, I talked about if Kenny Atkinson could only change one thing about Darius Garland's game, what would it be? And for me, Martin, I do think it's an easy answer. And it's not actually the answer that I talk about so much with Darius, because the thing I most commonly talk about is I would love for him to be a more aggressive shooter from the outside. I would love for him to take more three-pointers, because I think he is so good at that he's not maximizing himself if he doesn't do it enough. But the direction I'm going to go is if he could get Darius Garland to make quicker decisions with the basketball. I think that'd be a big uptick for the Cavs offensively. I think they could play at a better pace. That could get more out of that group. And I actually think that is something that would cut down on Darius Garland's turnovers just a little bit.
Yeah, I really like that answer, because I had 3 things I was thinking about during the break. One was...
That's why I need you to pick one.
Yeah, and I'll go through all 3 and I'll explain why the one I've picked is the one I picked. But I thought, initially, I do believe the assisted turnovers need to get to a place that are sustainable. I mean, he had basically an 8-3 2 seasons ago. It was basically 2-1 last year, which is just not going to get it done. So I do think making decisions more quickly, playing instinctual basketball, playing within the flow of the offense rather than thinking too much. I do think he was thinking too much last year. So I do think in general, he's at his best when he just plays and he's not worrying about how he should be playing. So that's number one. The second thing I was thinking about was, can he become a better spot up shooter? Is that something that he's going to be comfortable doing? Will he just let it fire instead of that hesitation that he was doing last year, where it almost looked like even then he was thinking about, what happens if I miss this shot? What is Donovan going to think about me? What are the fans going to think about me? And not saying that's going through his head, but it almost feels like that, when you take that extra second or two that can be an eternity. The third thing is the reasons I'm ultimately going to go with, and I think Kenny is going to force Darius to push the pace more and play a faster brand of basketball, which I think helps Donovan as your change of pace guy, because you don't need Donovan to then be the one initiating that push. When Don can be slowing the ball down, stalling it out, playing the isolation hero ball that he actually is very good at. And it's not just that he stalls it and doesn't move the ball. It's just he plays better in the slower form of the offense. I think if he and guys like Okoro and Evan, that 3-man unit between the 3 of those guys, I think if they play with pace, it's going to be very hard for other teams to match that pace. And you're going to have a really, really interesting two-man defensive unit with another guy at the crux of that will allow you to do a lot of different things. And I think bringing Isaac back is a big focal point of being able to do that. If you looked at when the team was doing really well in midseason, Isaac was initiating the offense and pushing that pace when they were playing really slowly. And I think getting the ball pushed off misses and finding easy opportunities, especially with what Evan is able to do in transition, if Darius is able to unlock both of those guys, you have him in a starter hybrid bench captain performance that I think really takes what this bench is able to do and pushes it to the next level. So I think mine is definitely can Kenny get Darius to play with more pace, because that was just not something JB was ever going to do.
Right. I think, and I don't think the pace thing with JB was a Darius Garland thing. Like, I don't think that he didn't want Darius Garland playing with pace. I think he was scared to play with pace with two bigs on the floor. I think that's what it was. And I don't think Kenny Atkinson's going to be that same way. So I do think what you said is something that he is going to push on to Darius Garland, where he's going to want him to play faster. And I'm not saying that they need to turn into the 7 seconds or less Suns. Like, that's a silly thing for this roster construction. But they can absolutely play faster than they were. They shouldn't be a bottom third of the league team in pace. They should be, close to the top half of the league in pace. And I think they've got the personnel to do it. I think Darius Garland would thrive in that situation. I think Evan Mobley would too. Like, I think that's when you start talking about how do you get the most out of Evan Mobley. I think pace is part of that discussion. I think playing with Darius Garland is going to be part of that discussion too. And it leads me to what I think is an interesting way to think about things, because there ultimately will be pairings of some sort. Now, we know that Jared Allen, Evan Mobley, Darius Garland, Donovan Mitchell, they're all going to start the game together. But the way I see it is there's going to be a pairing with Darius in one of the bigs, and there's going to be a pairing with Donovan in one of the bigs. Do you think Evan's the right answer to be with Darius?
I do. I actually really do. I mean, I think the two of them have a really nice rapport. I think they complement each other's skill sets well. I think what it allows you to do in the two-man game with Evan and Darius is Evan can be the hub of the offense in a lot of really interesting ways if you get creative with him. And then that pushes Darius into a place where he isn't really like thinking about playing off ball. It kind of just happens naturally, even if he's the primary ball handler. And there are going to be open looks for him to be explosive from beyond the arc. And that is still a skill that I think is underutilized on this basketball team, is just how dynamic Darius can be from 3-point. And I think if Kenny can unlock that in a variety of different ways, where the shots come in the flow of the offense rather than it being almost like a hot potato, like live grenade situation, which I do think happened a little bit too much in the last season or so, I think that's going to be really, really beneficial to the team overall. And I think you're going to see that 3-point percentage really across the board, not just for Darius, creep up. So I do think that's the two-man game that makes the most sense to me, because Don and Jarrett, they make so much sense together. There's so many things that they did, and it's such an unbelievably high level in that stretch where they went, 18-2 across that 20-game span. I want to watch that film over and over again if I'm Kenny Atkinson, and try to see what were the lineups that created that opportunity, and try to pair those players together and create those lineups rather than it being an accidental, let's try things out, throw a bunch of guys in there. I think lineup data is going to come into play more with this coaching staff than it did last season. I think you're going to start to see, all of our advanced metrics, fans of the Cavs be excited about the lineups that are being put out there rather than shaking their heads at what those lineups are.
Well, and I think the one reason why that grouping probably works a little bit better, why those two groupings are good matches, I think Donovan likes to play with somebody, and this is, historically dating back to his time in Utah, likes to play with somebody that's a really good screen setter. And there's no debate that Jared Allen is a much better screen setter than Evan Mobley. I think that Darius Garland has a little bit more creativity with the basketball in his hand, so he might not need somebody that is as good setting screens and operating in the pick and roll as Jared Allen is. So I do think that's part of the reason why he and Evan Mobley do make sense there. And I think that there are some fun creative things that you can unlock with that group depending on the other pieces that are around them. But I really do think that that is the right answer for the Cavs, just in terms of lineups, in terms of everything. I think that's kind of how they get the most out of this roster construction, really. So, Martin, you wrote a great story about Darius Garland a couple years ago where you really dug into who he was. I want to learn when we come back about what you learned about Darius Garland, the person. So that's straight ahead right here on Locked On Cavs. Today's show also brought to you by Gametime. Playoff baseball is almost here. You're going to want to go watch the Cleveland Guardians at Progressive Field with baseball games. Where are you going to get tickets? Might be too late to buy tickets from the team, so buy tickets through Gametime because Gametime is my favorite ticket marketplace. It should be your favorite ticket marketplace too. They've got everything you need, all the events, concerts, games. Maybe you want to go watch the Browns this Sunday at Huntington Bank Stadium or Huntington Bank Field. I forgot what it was called, that new name there, but Gametime knows exactly where that game is. They've got seats for you. And one of my favorite things that Gametime does, you can toggle on all-in pricing. So you know exactly how much you're going to be paying for a ticket before you even get to the end screen. I hate when I go through and I get to the finish line and then I'm bombarded with taxes and fees. No one likes that. Gametime can take that away. The other thing Gametime does is they will show you exactly what your view of the field or the stage or whatever you're going to, they will show you what it's going to look like from where you're sitting. I think that's very important. When I buy tickets, I want to know what it's going to look like for me. If I'm going to a Guardians game, I want to know what home plate's going to look like. I do. Gametime will show you. So take the guesswork out of buying tickets. Use Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, use code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off your first purchase. Terms do apply. Again, download the Gametime app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNBA, LOCKEDON NBA for $20 off your first purchase. What time is it? It's Gametime. Thank you again for making Locked On Cavs your first listen every day. For your second listen today, make it Locked On NBA, available wherever you get your podcast, bringing you all the national news you need to know. So, Martin, a couple of years ago, you wrote a great feature on Darius Garland in Dime. What did you learn about Darius away from the basketball floor while reporting that?
I was just surprised even then at how mature he was for how young he was. And I think when pulling up all the stats and everything in preparation for today, I had to take a look again at how old he is. He's not 25 yet, still, after all this time. And so it's one of those things, I think, going back into the feature and going back into my reporting process and kind of taking myself back to when, we spent the day together and we went to the Rock Hall and then we went to a 27 Club and had coffee and smoothies and, just went to the shoot and enjoyed, the waterfront and, did a variety of different shots for the photo shoot. And I would forget throughout that day that he was a 21-year-old at that time. And so I think, or 21 into 22. And so I just think in general, for me, the maturity has almost hurt him because we expect so much out of Darius and have expected so much out of him from such an early age, and the success came so early. And what happens after that is, how do you recover when you're young from adversity? And one of the quotes that really stuck out when I talked to him was, he talked about how he really likes to be coached hard and how he likes he likes things to be done the hard way, coming from Gary and, carving his own path and choosing Vanderbilt over a number of different schools at the time in which he did, and joining the Cavaliers and, taking on the ownership of wanting to be the face of that team, and then still really just like embracing the opportunity that had been put in front of him when Donovan was here rather than demanding a trade, taking that opportunity after this summer to basically refute the reports that had come out and said, I don't want to go anywhere else. Like, yes, my agents are looking out for my best interests, but I want to be here in Cleveland. I just think in general, that path of selecting the harder things and embracing those is going to work out very well for him long-term. And he still has a decade plus of an NBA career ahead of him. And so this first chapter, this first era, this first act for him does not define what his overall career is going to be. And I think that's really what has stood out for me looking back on that piece now.
Right. And as I read back through it, I wanted to earlier today before we did this. So as I'm reading back through this, I think to myself, with everything, because he's been through quite a few injuries. There have been some other off the court things that I think have taken a toll on him. But in getting a sense of who he is as a person, he's not somebody that I'm going to bet against. Like, I think a lot of that and a lot of what you just explained are reasons why I'm betting on Darius Garland to have a bounce back year. I'm betting on Darius Garland to get back to, he might not be on an all-star team, but to get back to all-star form. Like, I think he's a hard guy to not believe in once you read this type of thing.
Yeah, and I just think in general, having a coach like Kenny Atkinson for his development and what he's been able to do with guards over the course of his career coaching, both as a head coach and as an assistant, is going to do wonders for Darius Garland. Not just for his on-court performance, but for his overall demeanor as a leader, as a veteran, as a soon-to-be like true veteran in this league. I really believe that Kenny's experience, because Kenny has experienced something similar to what happened to Darius. He had a fall from grace, so to speak, and had to work his way back up and learn from other people and take the adversity that had been given to him through a variety of circumstances on court and off, honestly. I mean, if you even look at the Charlotte situation and making that decision not to be the head coach of Charlotte, like, I do think those two things, there's going to be a natural opportunity for you to develop chemistry between your coach and your star players here. And I think Darius is going to be a real beneficiary from what Kenny Atkinson and the assistants that they've brought in to fill out that staff, I think really are going to help Darius. And I do think they're going to help Evan a lot too. I mean, I know we've talked a lot about how it's a really important year for Evan's development, and whether or not he's going to be the star everyone wants him to be that they saw during his rookie season, when they were deciding he was a unicorn, deciding he was the second coming of, a variety of different players. But I think those two guys they're going to benefit big time from the staff that's been put together. And I'm really, really excited to see what the offense looks like.
No, I completely agree. I can't wait to see what the offense looks like. Everything I've heard from the people I've talked to, Kenny Atkinson's been a big hit so far in Cleveland. I'm excited to see what that looks like for this team. I'm very excited to see what that looks like for Darius Garland. Martin, anything else you want to get in about DG before we get out of here?
Not really, no. I mean, I'm sure he's sad about Tito Jackson's death. He's a big fan of the Jacksons and lived, very, very close to where the Jackson's childhood home was in Gary, and just saw that happened this week. So I'd be curious to see if he saw the news and kind of how he feels about that. But yeah, he's a big fan of music. So when you get into it with them, let's see what he's listening to. I'm curious what he's spinning right now.
That might be a question for him at Media Day, which is less than 2 weeks away. The season is very not so subtly creeping up on us. We can't wait to get to real basketball. Like I said, Cavs Media Day, September 30th. Training camp starts in Florida October 1st. Martin, thank you so much for doing this. Very much appreciate it. Everyone can check you out at Martin Rickman on Twitter. You are editing basically everyone's favorite Substack is the way I like to do it. You're not writing the Substacks. You're just making sure that they're great. Thanks so much, man.
Always, anytime, brother.
Thank you for making Locked On Cavs your first listen every day. Like I said earlier, big interview coming tomorrow. I'm not going to tell you who. All I'm going to tell you is a member of the Cavs coming on Locked On Cavs tomorrow. Stay tuned for that. Make sure you're subscribed anywhere you get your podcasts, Apple, Spotify, anywhere else. Check us out on YouTube. Just search Locked On Cavs. Hit that thumbs up button.